The moment the plane touched down at Norfolk International Airport, I felt something loosen in my chest. 8 months at sea, 8 months of watches and drills and the constant hum of machinery, 8 months of sleeping in a rack barely wide enough for my shoulders. I was finally home. Home. The word meant something different now than it had 4 years ago, before cancer stole my mother and grief transformed my father into a stranger. But I was trying to reclaim it, trying to rebuild the connections that distance and loss had frayed. That was why I had requested leave for these 2 weeks, why I had turned down an opportunity to visit friends in California, why I was heading straight to the house where I had grown up instead of my small apartment near the base. I wanted to see my father. I wanted to believe that the man I remembered, the man who had loved my mother with fierce devotion, was still in there somewhere beneath the changes of the last few years. I wanted to give him another chance. And yes, I wanted to see my mother's jewelry. It had become a ritual for me every time I came home. I would go to the bedroom that had once belonged to my parents, open the safe hidden in the closet, and spend a few minutes with the Alexandrite collection that had been in my family for 4 generations. The stones were extraordinary, shifting from deep green in daylight to rich burgundy under incandescent light. My mother used to say they were magical, that they changed color to match the mood of whoever wore them. I never believed in magic, but I believed in history, in heritage, in the unbroken chain of women who had passed these jewels from mother to daughter since my great-great-grandmother Benedita brought them from Brazil in 1890. My mother had shown me the collection for the first time on my 16th birthday. We sat on her bed, the velvet boxes spread between us, and she told me the story of each piece. The necklace Benedita had commissioned when she arrived in America, determined to transform her rough stones into something beautiful. The earrings her daughter had added a generation later. The brooch, the bracelet, the ring that had served as my grandmother's engagement ring, and then my mother's. Each piece was a chapter in our family's history, a tangible connection to women I had never met, but whose strength ran through my blood. "These will be yours someday," my mother had said, clasping the necklace around my neck so I could see it in the mirror. "Not just the stones, but the story, the legacy. You'll pass them to your daughter, and she'll pass them to hers, and our family will never be forgotten." That had been 10 years ago. My mother had been healthy then, vibrant and strong, with decades ahead of her. Neither of us knew that cancer was already growing inside her, silent and patient, waiting to steal everything. I pushed the memory aside as my rideshare pulled up to the house. The white Colonial looked the same as it always had, the azalea bushes my mother had planted still blooming in neat rows along the walkway. But there were changes I noticed immediately. A new car in the driveway, a sleek BMW that definitely did not belong to my father, wind chimes on the porch that my mother would have hated, a welcome mat with a cutesy slogan that made me wince. Kristen's Touches. My father's wife of 3 years, the woman who had appeared in his life 6 months after my mother's death with suspicious speed and even more suspicious interest. I had never trusted her, had seen the calculation behind her smile from the first moment we met. But my father was lonely and grieving, and Kristen was young and pretty and eager to fill the void my mother had left. They married 18 months after my mother's funeral. I was at officer candidate school, unable to attend even if I had wanted to. My father had seemed almost relieved by my absence, as if my presence would have been an uncomfortable reminder of the wife he was trying to replace. I rang the doorbell like a visitor, which was what I had become. The door opened to reveal Kristen, her blonde hair freshly styled, her makeup perfect, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Camille, you're early." She made no move to embrace me. "Your father is at work. He won't be home for a few hours." "That's fine. I wanted to settle in anyway." I stepped past her into the house, noting the changes that had accumulated since my last visit. New furniture in the living room, new art on the walls. The photographs of my mother that had once covered every surface were gone, replaced by pictures of Kristen and my father at various events, looking like a couple who had been together for decades rather than years. "I've put you in the guest room," Kristen said, watching me take in the alterations. "Your old room is my office now." Of course it was. I nodded and carried my bag upstairs, refusing to show how much the small cruelties affected me. My childhood bedroom, the room where my mother had tucked me in every night, where I had dreamed and studied and grown, was now a home office for a woman who had known my father for a fraction of the time. I dropped my bag in the guest room and immediately headed for the master bedroom. I knew I should wait, should ask permission, should respect the boundaries of a house that no longer felt like mine. But I needed to see the jewelry. I needed that connection to my mother, that tangible reminder of who I was and where I came from. The master bedroom had been transformed. The furniture was new, the colors different, the very air seeming to carry Kristen's scent rather than the familiar perfume my mother had worn. I pushed aside my discomfort and went to the closet, to the corner where the safe had stood for as long as I could remember. The safe was still there. I entered the combination my mother had taught me, the numbers that spelled out my birthday, and the door swung open. Empty. I stared at the hollow interior, certain I was seeing things wrong. The velvet boxes that held the jewelry were gone. The documents my mother had kept inside, the provenance papers and insurance certificates, were gone. The small leather pouch containing loose stones that Benedita had brought from Brazil, stones waiting to be set into future pieces for future generations, was gone. Everything was gone. Looking for something? I turned to find Kristen leaning against the doorframe, her arms crossed, her expression amused. "Where are my mother's jewels?" "Your mother's jewels." She repeated the words with a slight emphasis, as if correcting a child's grammar. "You mean the jewelry that was in this house? That belonged to this household?" "They belonged to my mother. They were her inheritance, passed down through her family. They had nothing to do with this household." My voice was rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Where are they, Kristen?" She examined her manicured nails with studied casualness. "I sold them. About 4 months ago. There's a wonderful auction house in New York that specializes in estate pieces." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. Sold. She had sold my family's heritage, 4 generations of history, the only tangible connection I had to my mother and the women who came before her. "You had no right." The words came out strangled. "Those jewels were mine. My mother promised them to me. They were never yours to sell." "Actually, they were exactly mine to sell." Kristen's smile sharpened. "When your mother died, everything in this house became your father's property. And when your father married me, what's his became mine to manage as I see fit. The kitchen needed renovation, and those old stones were just sitting in a safe gathering dust. A kitchen renovation. I could barely form the words. You sold $800,000 worth of irreplaceable family heirlooms for a kitchen renovation? Kristen's eyes flickered at the number, a brief flash of something that might have been surprise or greed. Is that what they were worth? The auction house gave me considerably less. But that's neither here nor there. The point is they're gone and there's nothing you can do about it. My father agreed to this? Your father agrees with whatever I tell him to agree with. There was no pretense now, no false warmth, just the cold satisfaction of a woman who had won. He's quite devoted, your father. He does whatever makes me happy. I pushed past her and down the stairs, my vision blurring with tears I refused to shed. My father. I needed to talk to my father. Surely he hadn't known what Kristen was doing. Surely he wouldn't have allowed the jewelry my mother treasured to be sold for something as mundane as kitchen cabinets. I called him from the front porch, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "Camille? I thought you weren't coming until—" "Dad, Kristen sold Mom's jewelry. The Alexandrite collection? She sold all of it." Silence on the other end. A long, damning silence. "Dad? Honey, I know you're upset." His voice was careful, measured, the voice of a man choosing his words with political precision. But Kristen and I discussed it, and we felt that the money would be better used for improving the house. Those jewels were just sitting there, and they were Mom's. They were supposed to be mine. She promised me, Dad. On her deathbed, she told me the collection would be mine. Another silence. I could hear him breathing, could imagine him rubbing his forehead the way he did when he was stressed. Your mother isn't here anymore, Camille. Things change. Kristen is my wife now, and we make decisions together about our household. I'm sorry if you're disappointed, but what's done is done. What's done is done. My mother's legacy, dismissed in 5 words. I can't talk to you right now. I ended the call before he could respond, before I said something I could not take back. I sat on the porch steps, staring at the azalea bushes my mother had planted, feeling the weight of loss settle over me again. 4 years since her death, and I was still losing her. Piece by piece, memory by memory, Kristen was erasing her from existence. And my father was helping. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, too overwhelmed to deal with anything else. But something made me look. Ensign Foster, my name is Julian Price. I represent the estate of Vivian Foster. Your mother left instructions that I contact you under specific circumstances. Those circumstances have now been met. Please call me at your earliest convenience. There is something you need to know. I read the message 3 times, my heart beginning to pound. My mother's estate. Instructions. Circumstances. My mother had been gone for 4 years. What could she possibly have left that I didn't already know about? I called the number immediately. Mr. Price? This is Camille Foster. You texted me about my mother. Ensign Foster, thank you for calling so quickly. His voice was warm, professional, with an undertone of something that sounded almost like satisfaction. Your mother was a remarkable woman. She anticipated a great many things that others would have missed. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? There's quite a lot to discuss, and I'd prefer to do it in person. What is this about? What did my mother leave? Something better than jewelry, Ensign Foster. I could hear the smile in his voice. Your mother left you the truth. Julian Price's office was located in a historic building in downtown Richmond, the kind of place that whispered old money and discretion. The receptionist led me to a corner office with tall windows overlooking the city, where a distinguished black man in his 60s rose to greet me. Ensign Foster, thank you for coming. His handshake was firm, his eyes kind but sharp. Please have a seat. Can I offer you coffee? Water? Just answers. I settled into the leather chair across from his desk. What did my mother leave me? And why am I only hearing about it now? Julian sat down and folded his hands on his desk, regarding me with the careful attention of a man about to deliver complicated news. Your mother came to me 8 months before she died. She was already ill, already receiving treatment, but her mind was sharp as ever. She had discovered something that disturbed her deeply, and she wanted to ensure that you would be protected regardless of what happened after her death. What did she discover? That your father was having an affair. The words landed like a physical blow. I had suspected, of course. The timing of Kristen's appearance in my father's life, the speed of their courtship, the way he had seemed almost eager to move on from my mother's memory. But suspecting was different from knowing. She found out while she was sick? 10 months before she died. Julian's voice was gentle. She discovered text messages on your father's phone. He had been careless, left his phone unlocked, and she saw enough to understand what was happening. Kristen. Yes, though she didn't know the name at first. Just the initial K and increasingly explicit messages. She did her own investigation over the following weeks, piecing together the identity of the other woman. I tried to imagine my mother, weakened by chemotherapy, using what energy she had to track down evidence of her husband's betrayal. The thought was almost unbearable. Why didn't she confront him? Why didn't she tell me? She considered both options. But she was a practical woman, your mother. She knew that a confrontation would consume what little time she had left. She knew that telling you would force you to choose sides, to carry anger and grief simultaneously. She chose a different path. Julian opened a drawer and removed a thick folder. She chose to protect you. He spread documents across the desk, and I leaned forward to examine them. Legal papers, certificates, photographs, and at the center, a small brass key. Your mother's jewelry collection was her separate property, inherited from her mother and grandmother before that. It was never marital property, never subject to your father's control. She had documentation proving the provenance of every piece, the chain of inheritance going back to your great-great-grandmother Benedita. But the jewelry is gone. Kristen sold it. Julian's smile was enigmatic. Did she? I stared at him, not understanding. She told me yesterday. She sold everything to an auction house 4 months ago. She sold something to an auction house. But it wasn't your mother's Alexandrite collection. He slid a photograph across the desk. These are the pieces Kristen sold. I looked at the image, recognizing the familiar shapes of my mother's jewelry. The necklace, the earrings, the brooch, the bracelet, the ring. They looked exactly as I remembered them. I don't understand. These are my mother's jewels. These are replicas of your mother's jewels. High-quality reproductions made with synthetic alexandrite and gold-plated settings. Beautiful to look at, virtually indistinguishable to the untrained eye, but worth perhaps $5,000 rather than $800,000. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing to process what he was telling me. My mother had replicas made? Your mother anticipated that your father might give the original collection to his mistress, either while your mother was alive or after her death. She was determined that your heritage would not be stolen by a woman who had already stolen her husband. He picked up the brass key and handed it to me. 3 months before she died, your mother visited a master jeweler who specialized in museum-quality reproductions. She had copies made of every piece in the collection. Then she placed the originals in a safe deposit box in your name alone. The key felt warm in my palm, solid and real. The real jewelry is in a bank somewhere? First National Bank of Richmond, box number 1847. It has been there for 4 years, waiting for the day when you would need it. Julian's expression softened. Your mother loved you more than you can imagine, Ensign Foster. She spent the last months of her life ensuring that her death would not leave you vulnerable. I clutched the key, feeling tears prick at my eyes. My mother, dying of cancer, betrayed by her husband, had still found the strength to protect me. She had known what Kristen was. She had known what my father would become. And she had prepared. There's more. Julian pulled another document from the folder. Your mother also left a letter to be delivered to you under specific circumstances. She instructed me to give it to you when and if the jewelry was sold or given away by your father or any subsequent wife. He handed me an envelope, my name written on the front in my mother's familiar handwriting. The sight of it broke something inside me, a flood of grief and love and gratitude that I could barely contain. I'll give you a moment. Julian stood and walked to the window, his back turned to give me privacy. I opened the envelope with trembling hands and began to read. My darling Camille, if you're reading this letter, then my worst fears have come true. Your father has given away our family's jewels, probably to the woman he's been seeing behind my back. I know about her, baby. I found out a few months ago, and I've spent many sleepless nights deciding what to do about it. I could confront your father. I could rage and weep and demand explanations. But what would be the point? I'm dying, Camille. The doctors don't say it in those words, but I can read between the lines. I have months, not years, and I don't want to spend them fighting a battle I can't win. So instead, I'm going to tell you what I know, and I'm going to make sure you're protected. Your father has been seeing a woman named Kristen. She works at Morrison's Jewelry, the store where he buys my birthday and anniversary gifts. Ironic, isn't it? He met his mistress while shopping for presents for his wife. I've seen pictures of her. She's younger, blonde, the kind of pretty that comes from careful maintenance rather than inner light. I don't hate her. I don't have the energy for hate. But I don't trust her, and neither should you. When I'm gone, your father will probably marry her. He's not strong enough to be alone, and she's not the type to let an opportunity slip away. She'll move into our house, sleep in our bed, wear the clothes I leave behind. And eventually, she'll want my jewelry. Don't let her have it, baby. Those stones are your heritage, the legacy of 4 generations of strong Black women who survived slavery, survived poverty, survived everything the world threw at them. Great-great-grandmother Benedita carried them out of Brazil in a pouch around her neck, risking everything to bring them to America. Your great-grandmother wore them to her wedding. Your grandmother wore them the day she graduated from college, the first in our family to earn a degree. I wore them the day you were born. They belong to you. They have always belonged to you. And I have made sure that no one can take them from you. The jewelry your father and his new wife have is fake. Beautiful fakes, but fakes nonetheless. The real pieces are in a safe deposit box that only you can access. Julian Price has the key and the paperwork. He'll give them to you when you need them. But the jewelry is not the only thing I'm leaving you, Camille. I'm also leaving you the truth. The house we live in was my inheritance, not your father's. My parents left it to me when they died, and I never transferred it to joint ownership. Your father lives there because I let him, not because he has any legal right to it. I have left the house to you in my will, a separate will that your father knows nothing about. When the time is right, Julian will explain. I'm also leaving you documentation of your father's affair, not because I want you to hate him. He's still your father, and he loves you in his own weak way, but because you deserve to know the truth. Whatever story he tells about how he met Kristen, whatever timeline he constructs, you'll know the reality. I'm so sorry, baby. Sorry that I won't be there to protect you in person. Sorry that your father isn't the man I thought he was. Sorry that you'll have to fight battles I should be fighting for you. But I know you're strong enough. You're a foster woman, a daughter of Benedita and all the warriors who came after her. You carry our blood, our history, our legacy. No lying husband and no scheming mistress can take that from you. Wear the Alexandrite with pride, my darling. And when you look at those stones changing color in the light, remember that things are not always what they seem. The fakes looked real. The real ones were hidden. And sometimes the truth only comes out when you shine the right light on it. I love you to the stars and back, Mom. I sat in Julian Price's office and wept, holding my mother's letter in my hands, feeling her love wrap around me like a physical embrace. She had known. She had known everything. And instead of crumbling, instead of giving in to despair, she had spent her final months building armor to protect me. There's one more thing, Julian said gently, returning to his desk. The documentation your mother mentioned. She gathered quite a lot of evidence about your father's affair, and she was very specific about when and how it should be used. He opened another folder. Your mother believed that Kristen was not just after your father. She was after everything your mother had built. The jewelry, the house, the financial security. Your mother wanted to make sure that when the time came, you would have the ammunition to fight back. I wiped my eyes and looked at the folder. Inside were photographs, receipts, printed text messages, evidence of an affair that had begun long before my mother died, that had continued throughout her illness, that had been hidden behind a facade of devoted husband and grieving widower. The house, I said slowly. My mother said the house was hers, that she left it to me. That's correct. Your mother created a separate will that left the house directly to you, bypassing your father entirely. He has been living there without legal right since her death. Julian met my eyes. When you're ready, we can begin the process of claiming your inheritance. I looked at the letter in my hand, at the folder of evidence, at the key to a safe deposit box holding $800,000 in Alexandrite jewelry. My mother had left me something better than jewels. She had left me weapons. And I was going to use them. The First National Bank of Richmond was a stately building that had stood on Main Street for over a century, its marble columns and brass fixtures speaking to an era when banks were designed to inspire confidence and permanence. I walked through the revolving door with my mother's key in my pocket and her letter in my purse, feeling like I was stepping into a story that had been waiting years to continue. The safe deposit box room was in the basement, a vault of metal drawers stretching from floor to ceiling, each one holding someone's secrets, someone's treasures, someone's memories. The bank officer led me to box 1847 and left me alone in a private viewing room, the heavy door closing behind her with a solid click. I inserted the key and turned it, feeling the mechanism release. The drawer slid open and I caught my breath. The jewelry was there, all of it. Nestled in velvet-lined boxes that I recognized from my childhood, the Alexandrite collection glowed with an inner fire that no replica could match. Under the fluorescent lights of the viewing room, the stones shimmered green, deep and mysterious as a forest pool. I knew that under incandescent light, they would transform to burgundy, the magical color change that made Alexandrite one of the rarest gemstones on Earth. I lifted the necklace first, feeling its weight in my hands. My great-great-grandmother Benedita had touched these same stones, had worn this necklace at her wedding to a freedman in 1895. My great-grandmother had clasped it around her neck for her college graduation in 1935. My grandmother had worn it on her wedding day in 1962. My mother had worn it the day I was born. And now it was mine. I examined each piece in turn, the earrings and brooch and bracelet and ring, each one a chapter in my family's history. They were even more beautiful than I remembered, the stones more vibrant, the settings more intricate. My mother had kept them in perfect condition, had polished and cared for them with the devotion of a curator preserving priceless artifacts. Beneath the jewelry boxes was a larger envelope, thick with documents. I opened it and found the provenance papers my mother had mentioned, certificates tracing the ownership of each piece back to Benedita's original purchase. There were appraisal documents showing the collection's current value, $847,000 for the set, with individual pieces ranging from $89,000 for the ring to $285,000 for the necklace. And there was more. A second will, my mother's secret testament, leaving the house on Azalea Drive to me and me alone. A deed showing the house had been my mother's separate property, inherited from her parents, never transferred to joint ownership with my father. Insurance policies naming me as the sole beneficiary. Bank statements showing accounts I had never known existed. My mother had been building this safety net for years, long before she ever suspected my father's betrayal. She had been careful, protective, determined to ensure that her daughter would never be left vulnerable. The affair had simply accelerated her plans, given them urgency and focus. At the bottom of the envelope was another letter, shorter than the first, but no less powerful. Camille, if you found the jewelry, you've also found the documents. I've left you everything I could, everything that was mine to give. But I need you to know something else, something that will help you understand. I knew about Kristen before she had a name. I knew your father was capable of betrayal before he committed it. When I was first diagnosed with cancer, I saw something change in his eyes. Not grief. That came later, when the reality of my illness set in. But before the grief, there was something else. A calculation. A measurement of what my death would mean for him. I loved your father, Camille. I still love him, even knowing what I know. But I see him clearly now, with the vision that comes when you're standing at the edge of eternity. He is a weak man, a man who measures his value by what he possesses and who possesses him. Without me, he would be lost. And he knew it. He started looking for my replacement before I was even gone. I don't tell you this to make you hate him. I tell you so you'll understand why I did what I did. I couldn't trust your father to protect you. I couldn't trust him to honor my memory or respect my wishes. So I protected you myself. The jewelry is yours. The house is yours. The truth is yours. Use them wisely. And remember, the best revenge is living well. Don't waste your life on anger. Build something beautiful with what I've left you. All my love, Mom. I sat in that small viewing room for a long time, surrounded by my mother's legacy, processing everything I had learned. My father's betrayal had begun before my mother even died. He had been measuring her worth, calculating his options, looking for her replacement while she was still fighting for her life. And my mother had known. She had seen through him, had understood his weakness, had loved him anyway while quietly building defenses against the harm he would cause. The anger I felt was cold and clear, not the hot rage of yesterday's discovery, but something more focused. My father and Kristen thought they had won. They thought they had stolen my mother's jewelry, claimed her house, erased her from existence. They had no idea that everything they believed they possessed was an illusion. The jewelry Kristen sold was fake. The house they lived in belonged to me. And the truth about their affair, documented in my mother's meticulous handwriting, was a weapon waiting to be deployed. I carefully packed the jewelry back into its boxes and placed everything in the leather satchel I had brought. The bank officer helped me carry the documents, multiple folders of evidence and legal papers that represented 4 years of my mother's planning. Julian Price was waiting for me when I returned to his office, a pot of tea steaming on his desk. "Did you find everything?" "More than I expected." I set the satchel on his conference table and began removing the folders. She documented everything. The affair, the house, the finances. She built a complete case. Your mother was a paralegal for 15 years before she became ill. She knew how to build a case. Julian poured 2 cups of tea and handed me one. She also knew how to protect herself in court. Everything in those folders would be admissible as evidence if needed. Evidence for what? For whatever you choose to do with it. He sat back in his chair, regarding me with thoughtful eyes. You have several options, Ensign Foster. You can claim the house through the probate process, which is straightforward given the documentation. You can pursue charges against Kristen for selling property that didn't belong to her, though that becomes complicated since she sold replicas rather than the real jewelry. Or you can simply take what's yours and walk away. What would my mother have wanted? She wanted you to be protected. She wanted you to have your heritage. Beyond that, he shrugged. She trusted you to make the right decisions. I thought about my father, about the man who had taught me to ride a bicycle and helped me with homework and walked me down the aisle at my high school graduation. I thought about the man who had started an affair while his wife was dying, who had married his mistress within months of the funeral, who had allowed that mistress to sell jewelry that wasn't his to give. They were the same man. That was the hardest part to accept. I want the house, I said finally. I want Kristen to face consequences for selling the jewelry, even if it was fake. And I want my father to know that my mother saw through him, that she knew what he was doing and she made sure I would be protected. Julian nodded slowly. Then we have work to do. But first, I think you should know what happened to the jewelry Kristen sold. The auction house has been in touch with me. They have? The buyer who purchased the collection had it appraised by an independent expert. The expert determined that the stones were synthetic alexandrite, not natural. The buyer is threatening to sue the auction house for fraud, and the auction house is investigating Kristen for misrepresentation. A smile tugged at my lips. The first genuine smile I had felt since arriving in Richmond. She's in trouble? Significant trouble. Selling fake jewelry as authentic is a form of fraud, whether she knew the pieces were fake or not. The auction house paid her approximately $180,000 for what they believed was an $800,000 collection. They will want that money back plus damages. Kristen had tried to steal my inheritance and had ended up entangling herself in a fraud case. There was a poetic justice to it that my mother would have appreciated. What do we do first? First, we file notice of the separate will with the probate court. Then we send a formal demand to your father to vacate the property. And then, Julian's smile matched my own. Then we see how Kristen responds when she discovers that everything she thought she had stolen was never real in the first place. I looked at the jewelry boxes in my satchel, at the alexandrite stones that had traveled from Brazil to America, from generation to generation, finally resting in my hands where they belonged. My mother had left me something better than jewelry. She had left me justice. I spent the rest of that day in Julian's office, signing documents and learning the details of my mother's estate. The house on Azalea Drive was valued at approximately $420,000, a comfortable colonial in a desirable neighborhood. My mother had paid off the mortgage years ago, using an inheritance from her parents, and had never added my father to the deed. Your father has been living in that house without any legal right for 4 years, Julian explained. He assumed that as her widower, he automatically inherited the property. But your mother's will was quite specific. The house goes to you, along with its contents at the time of her death. Contents including the jewelry? Contents including whatever was physically present in the house when she died. However, since you can prove the jewelry was your mother's separate property, you have a claim to it regardless of location. He paused. The wrinkle, of course, is that the jewelry your father and Kristen had access to was not the real collection. Legally speaking, they possessed fakes that belonged to your mother's estate. So Kristen sold property that wasn't hers to sell, even though it wasn't what she thought it was. Exactly. She committed theft and fraud, regardless of the value of what she actually stole. I thought about the tangled legal web my mother had woven, the multiple layers of protection she had built. Even from beyond the grave, she had anticipated every possible way my father and Kristen might try to steal from me. By the time I left Julian's office, I had a clear plan. Tomorrow, we would file the paperwork to claim the house. Next week, we would confront my father and Kristen with the evidence. And in between, I would wear my mother's jewelry for the first time in 4 years, reconnecting with the heritage that had almost been stolen from me. I drove to a quiet restaurant for dinner, the alexandrite ring on my finger, watching the stone shift colors as I moved from sunlight to artificial light. Green to red, emerald to ruby, a constant reminder that things were not always what they seemed. My mother had known that truth better than anyone, and she had made sure I would learn it too. I wore my mother's necklace to the confrontation, not the replica that Kristen had sold, but the real one. 4 generations of alexandrite stones cascading across my collarbone in a river of green fire. It was a statement, a declaration, a reminder to myself of what I was fighting for. Julian Price accompanied me to the house on Azalea Drive, his briefcase filled with documents and legal notices. We had timed our arrival carefully, choosing a Sunday afternoon when both my father and Kristen would be home. What we had not anticipated was the audience. My Aunt Marlene was there, my mother's sister, along with her husband and 2 adult children. My father's brother, Uncle Ray, had also come, apparently for a family dinner that no one had mentioned to me. The house was full of people who had known my mother, who had attended her funeral, who had watched my father remarry with varying degrees of approval. Kristen answered the door, her smile freezing when she saw Julian standing beside me. "Camille, you brought a lawyer?" "I brought my mother's lawyer." I stepped past her into the living room, where the gathered family members looked up with various expressions of curiosity and concern. "I'm sorry to interrupt dinner, but there are some things that need to be addressed." My father rose from his chair, his expression wary. "What is this about?" "It's about Mom's jewelry. It's about this house. It's about a lot of things you probably hoped I would never discover." I reached into my purse and removed the folder of documents, the same folder my mother had prepared 4 years ago. Julian set his briefcase on the coffee table and opened it, revealing additional papers and the will that would change everything. "You're making a scene," Kristen hissed. "Whatever grievance you have, we can discuss it privately." "No." I turned to face the room, the assembled family members who were watching with growing interest. "I think everyone here should know the truth. You all knew my mother. You attended her funeral. You deserve to know what happened after she died." Aunt Marlene leaned forward, her expression sharp. "What are you talking about, Camille?" 3 days ago, I discovered that Kristen sold my mother's alexandrite jewelry collection, a collection that has been in our family for 4 generations, passed from mother to daughter since my great-great-grandmother Benedita brought it from Brazil in 1890. Murmurs of shock rippled through the room. Aunt Marlene's face went pale. "Kristen claims she had the right to sell the jewelry because it belonged to my father after Mom died. But that's not true." I held up the provenance papers. This collection was my mother's separate property, inherited from her mother, never marital property. Dad had no right to it, and neither did Kristen. My father started to speak, but Julian cut him off. "Mr. Foster, I would advise you to listen before responding. There's more, and it's significant." I continued, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. "But here's the interesting part. The jewelry Kristen sold wasn't real. It was a set of replicas my mother had made 3 months before she died." Kristen's face went white. "That's impossible. Those were the stones from the safe. I had them appraised." "You had fakes appraised by someone who didn't know what to look for. A genuine alexandrite expert would have spotted the synthetic stones immediately." I smiled without warmth. "Which is exactly what happened when the buyer hired their own appraiser. You sold $180,000 worth of fake jewelry that you represented as authentic. The auction house is quite upset about it. I believe they're preparing legal action." The room exploded in shocked exclamations. Uncle Ray was staring at Kristen with undisguised suspicion. Aunt Marlene had tears streaming down her face. My father looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "Where are the real jewels?" Aunt Marlene demanded. "Vivian promised that collection to Camille. I was there when she made the promise." I touched the necklace at my throat, the alexandrite stones warm against my skin. "The real collection has been in a safe deposit box for 4 years, in my name, waiting for me to claim it. Mom knew the jewelry would be stolen. She prepared." I turned to my father, who had sunk back into his chair, his face gray. "She knew about a lot of things, Dad. She knew about things you hoped would stay buried. Camille, she knew about Kristen. She knew about the affair you were having while she was dying of cancer." The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye in the room fixed on my father, who looked as though he had been physically struck. "That's a lie," Kristen said, but her voice was too shrill, too defensive. It's not a lie. Mom found the text messages. She documented everything. I pulled out the folder of evidence and held it up. She knew your name, Kristen. She knew where you worked. She knew the hotels you visited and the gifts he bought you while she was going through chemotherapy. Aunt Marlene rose from her seat, her face contorted with rage. You were cheating on my sister while she was dying? My father opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. Vivian knew, I continued. She knew, and she chose not to confront you. She didn't want to spend her last months fighting, but she made sure I would know the truth when the time was right. I handed the folder to Aunt Marlene, who began flipping through the pages with trembling hands. Photographs of my father and Kristen at a restaurant, dated 8 months before my mother's death. Hotel receipts, text message printouts. A timeline of betrayal that stretched back almost 2 years before my mother died. You told us you met after Vivian passed, Uncle Ray said, his voice cold. You said Kristen helped you through your grief. My father swallowed hard. It's not what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like. I pulled out the final document, the one that would change everything. And here's one more truth you never expected me to learn. This house was never yours, Dad. It was Mom's inheritance from her parents. She never transferred it to joint ownership, and she left it to me in a will you didn't know existed. Julian stepped forward. Mr. Foster, this is a formal notice that the property at 2847 Azalea Drive belongs to Ensign Camille Foster, pursuant to the last will and testament of Vivian Foster. You have 60 days to vacate the premises. My father stared at the document as if it were written in a foreign language. She left me the house. In her will? She left you the house in the will you knew about, the will that went through probate after her death. But that will was superseded by a subsequent document, properly witnessed and notarized, that left the house to Camille. Julian's voice was professionally neutral, but I caught a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. Your wife anticipated that you might try to give away her property to someone else. She made sure that wouldn't be possible. Kristen grabbed my father's arm. You said the house was yours. You said everything was taken care of. You said, I didn't know. My father's voice was barely a whisper. Vivian never told me. Vivian knew you couldn't be trusted. I watched him crumble. This man who had been my hero and my protector, who had held me when I cried and taught me to be strong. The man who had betrayed my mother while she was dying, who had married his mistress and let her sell my heritage. She loved you anyway, Dad. But she wasn't going to let you destroy what she'd built. The family members began to gather their things, their expressions ranging from shock to disgust to barely concealed satisfaction. Uncle Ray shook his head at my father without a word. Aunt Marlene embraced me, whispering that my mother would be proud. When the house had emptied of everyone except my father, Kristen, Julian, and me, I took one last look around the space that would soon be mine. I'm not going to throw you out immediately, I said. You have 60 days like the notice says, but I want you to understand something. I removed my mother's necklace and held it up, watching the alexandrite stones shift from green to red in the fading afternoon light. Mom saw you for exactly what you are, both of you. She saw you, and she prepared, and she won. Everything you thought you had, the jewelry, the house, the victory, was never real. Just like those fake stones you sold, Kristen. I clasped the necklace around my throat again and walked toward the door. She left me something better than jewelry, Dad. She left me the truth, and I'm going to use it. I walked out of that house and did not look back. Julian followed me to my car, his expression a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal sympathy. That was difficult, he said, confronting your father like that, in front of the family. It was necessary. I leaned against my car, suddenly exhausted. My mother didn't document all that evidence just to have it sit in a box. She wanted the truth to come out. She wanted people to know what he did. And now they do. Julian glanced back at the house, where I could see my father and Kristen through the window, engaged in what appeared to be a heated argument. I suspect the next few weeks will be interesting for them. The legal consequences began to unfold almost immediately. The auction house filed a formal complaint against Kristen for fraudulent representation, demanding return of the $180,000 they had paid her plus additional damages. The buyer who had purchased the fake jewelry joined the suit, adding another layer of liability. Kristen's attorney called Julian within days, trying to negotiate a settlement. She claims she didn't know the jewelry was fake, Julian reported during one of our phone calls. She says your father told her it was authentic and she had no reason to question him. Does that matter legally? It matters for fraud charges. If she genuinely believed the jewelry was real, she might avoid criminal liability for fraud. But she still sold property that wasn't hers to sell, which is theft. And the auction house doesn't care whether she knew or not. They want their money back. The financial pressure on Kristen and my father mounted rapidly. They did not have $180,000 to return to the auction house. The renovation Kristen had claimed was necessary had consumed most of what she received from the sale, and what remained had gone to credit card payments and lifestyle expenses. They were going to have to liquidate assets to pay their debts, and the biggest asset they had, the house, wasn't even theirs. My Aunt Marlene called me regularly with updates on the family fallout. Uncle Ray had cut off all contact with my father, refusing to speak to the man who had betrayed his dying wife. Other relatives had similarly distanced themselves, shocked by the evidence of my father's affair and disgusted by his marriage to the other woman. He's completely isolated, Aunt Marlene reported. No one will talk to him. The friends he and Vivian shared have all sided with you. Even the people from church have started avoiding him. I felt no satisfaction in my father's ostracism. He was still my father, still the man who had raised me and loved me in his own flawed way. But he had made his choices, and choices had consequences. My mother had understood that better than anyone. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Kristen moved out. She left my father alone in a house that wasn't his, facing lawsuits he couldn't afford to fight, abandoned by the woman he had sacrificed everything to be with. My father called me once after Kristen left. His voice was hollow, defeated. I'm sorry, Camille. I know that doesn't mean much now, but I'm sorry. For all of it. I know you are, Dad. Your mother? She was a better person than I deserved. I see that now. She was, I agreed. But she loved you anyway. That was who she was. Silence stretched between us, filled with everything we could not say. Finally, my father spoke again. The house. I'll be out before the 60 days. I need to figure out where to go. Take your time. The words surprised me as much as they seemed to surprise him. I'm not going to throw you out on the street, Dad. Just figure things out. And maybe think about the choices you made and why you made them. He thanked me and hung up. And I sat in my apartment near the naval base, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. Things were not always what they seemed. My father had seemed devoted but had been betraying my mother for years. Kristen had seemed victorious but had sold fake jewelry for a fraction of its worth. And my mother, who had seemed helpless against her illness, had been the strongest of all. 1 year after finding my mother's letter, I stood in the doorway of the house on Azalea Drive and watched the moving truck pull away. The boxes inside contained everything that remained of my father's life in this house. Furniture and clothes and miscellaneous items that he would take to a small apartment across town. He had stayed the full 60 days, then asked for an extension to find a new place. I had granted it, and then granted another. 3 months after the confrontation, he finally moved out, leaving behind a house that was now mine to do with as I pleased. Kristen had disappeared from his life almost immediately after the legal troubles began. She had blamed him for the fake jewelry, accused him of setting her up, claimed she had been deceived as much as anyone. Their marriage, built on betrayal and greed, could not survive the first real pressure it faced. She filed for divorce within 2 months, demanding half of assets that did not exist, threatening lawsuits she could not afford to pursue. My father, alone and broken, had finally begun to understand what he had lost. Not the house, not the money, not the jewelry. He had lost the respect of everyone who had ever loved him. He had lost his place in the family, his reputation in the community, his sense of himself as a good man. And he had lost me, or at least the version of me who had trusted him without question. We still talked occasionally. I was not capable of cutting him off completely. He was still my father, still connected to me by blood and history and 22 years of memories. But our relationship would never be what it had been. The knowledge of what he had done, the evidence my mother had gathered, stood between us like a wall that could never be fully dismantled. I walked through the empty house, my footsteps echoing on hardwood floors that had known 4 generations of my family. The walls were bare now, the furniture removed, but I could still see the ghost of what this place had been. The corner where the Christmas tree had always stood, the kitchen where my mother had taught me to cook, the living room where she had shown me the Alexandrite jewelry for the first time, explaining the history of each piece. I wore the necklace now, as I did almost every day. The stones seemed to glow against my skin, green in the morning light through the windows, waiting to shift to red when evening came. My mother had worn this necklace for 20 years before me. Her mother had worn it for 30 years before that. Generations of women, strong and resilient and determined to protect what mattered. The renovation would begin next week. I was not erasing the house's history, just updating it for my own life. New paint, new fixtures, a fresh start while honoring the foundation my mother had left me. The azalea bushes out front would stay, carefully maintained, a living connection to the woman who had planted them. Aunt Marlene arrived in the afternoon, carrying boxes of items she had been storing for me, photographs my mother had given her for safekeeping, quilts made by my grandmother, a box of letters my mother had written to me as a child, saved for when I was old enough to appreciate them. She knew, Aunt Marlene said, watching me unwrap a framed portrait of my mother holding me as an infant. From the moment she was diagnosed, she started preparing. Not just the jewelry and the house, everything. She wanted to make sure you would have what you needed. She left me more than she needed to, I said. The jewelry alone was enough. The jewelry was the least of it. Aunt Marlene sat down on the floor beside me, her joints protesting with age. She left you knowledge, Camille. Knowledge of who you are, where you come from, what you're capable of. She left you a history you can be proud of. She pulled a small book from one of the boxes, worn with age and handling. This was Benedita's journal. Your mother never showed it to anyone. She was saving it for you. Benedita wrote about leaving Brazil, about the journey to America, about starting over with nothing but hope and a pouch of stones around her neck. I took the journal with reverent hands, feeling the weight of history in its pages. My great-great-grandmother's words, preserved for over a century, waiting for me to read them. Your mother wanted you to understand, Aunt Marlene continued. The women in our family have always faced challenges. Slavery, poverty, discrimination, loss. But we survive. We protect each other. We pass down what matters, not just jewelry and property, but strength, resilience, the determination to keep going when everything seems lost. I opened the journal and read the first page. Benedita's handwriting faded but still legible. I carry the stones because they remind me that beauty can come from darkness. In the mines, there was only shadow and dust. But sometimes, if you looked in the right place, you would find a crystal that caught the light and became something more than it seemed. That is what we must be. Crystals that catch whatever light there is and make something beautiful from it. I closed the journal and held it against my chest, feeling tears track down my cheeks. 4 generations of women, each one facing her own darkness, each one finding her own light. And now the legacy was mine to carry forward. Thank you, I whispered. To Aunt Marlene, to my mother, to Benedita, and all the women who came between them. That evening, I sat on the porch of my house and watched the sun set over the azalea bushes. The Alexandrite necklace shifted from green to red as the daylight faded, marking the transition from day to night the way it had for over a century. My phone buzzed with a message from a friend in the Navy, asking about my plans now that my leave was ending. I would return to active duty next week, back to the ship and the routines that had structured my life for years. But I would return different, stronger, more certain of who I was and what I came from. I thought about my mother, about the gift she had given me. Not just the jewelry, not just the house, but the understanding that love could be stronger than death, that preparation could defeat betrayal, that the women in my family were warriors, each in her own way, fighting battles that sometimes lasted beyond a single lifetime. She had left me something better than jewelry. She had left me a heritage of strength. She had left me the knowledge that I was never alone, that I carried generations of survivors within me, that I was capable of facing whatever darkness came because I came from women who had faced their own. I touched the necklace at my throat, feeling the stones warm against my skin. "Thank you, Mom," I said to the evening air. "I understand now. I understand everything." The alexandrite glowed red in the fading light, a promise and a reminder. Things were not always what they seemed. The fakes had been sold, the truth had been revealed. And I, Camille Foster, daughter of Vivian, great-great-granddaughter of Benedita, had claimed my inheritance. Not just the jewelry, not just the house, something better. The months that followed brought a settling, a gradual normalization of my new reality. The legal matters with Kristen were resolved through a combination of settlements and court orders. The auction house accepted a payment plan that would take her years to complete. The buyer who had purchased the fake jewelry received a full refund from the auction house, which in turn pursued Kristen for reimbursement. Her credit was ruined, her reputation destroyed, her brief marriage to my father ending in acrimony and mutual blame. I received updates about her occasionally, through the small-town grapevine that connected Richmond's communities. She had moved to another state, trying to start over somewhere her history was not known. I did not wish her well, but I did not wish her harm either. She had been a symptom of my father's weakness, not its cause. The damage she had done was real, but the root of the problem had always been him. My father and I found a new equilibrium, fragile but functional. He came to the house on Azalea Drive once, after I had finished the renovations, and stood in the living room looking at the photographs I had hung on the walls. My mother was everywhere now, her presence restored to the home she had loved. Her wedding portrait over the fireplace, her graduation pictures in the hallway. The family photographs that Kristen had removed, now back in their rightful places. "She looks happy," my father said, gazing at a picture of my mother holding me as a toddler. She was happy. For a long time, she was very happy. I did not say what we both knew, that his betrayal had stolen the happiness from her final years. He left after an hour, promising to stay in touch, knowing that our relationship would never be what it once was. I watched him drive away and felt a mixture of grief and peace. The father I had known was gone, replaced by a diminished man who had to live with the consequences of his choices. I could not change that. I could only move forward. The jewelry became part of my daily life in ways I had not anticipated. I wore the ring to work, a constant reminder of my heritage. I wore the earrings to formal events, feeling the weight of generations on my shoulders. And on special occasions, when I wanted to feel connected to every woman who had come before me, I wore the full collection: necklace, earrings, brooch, bracelet, and ring, a complete set of history and legacy. I met someone that year, a fellow officer named Marcus, who understood my commitment to duty and did not feel threatened by my strength. On our third date, I told him the story of the alexandrite collection, the affair, the fake jewelry, the truth my mother had left behind. He listened without judgment, asked thoughtful questions, and at the end said simply, "Your mother sounds like an incredible woman." She was, I agreed, and she left me incredible things. The first time I brought Marcus to the house on Azalea Drive, I showed him the collection properly, each piece laid out on velvet in the light of the living room. I explained the history, the journey from Brazil to America, the generations of women who had worn these stones. "The alexandrite changes color," I said, holding the necklace up to the lamp. "Green in daylight, red in incandescent light." My mother used to say it was a reminder that things aren't always what they seem. That sounds like wisdom that applies to a lot of life. It does. I looked at the stones, at the deep red they displayed under the warm light. My mother knew that my father wasn't what he seemed. She knew Kristen wasn't what she seemed. And she knew I was stronger than I seemed, strong enough to handle the truth when the time came. Marcus took my hand, his grip warm and steady. "And you were." I was, because she prepared me to be. We were married the following year, in the backyard of the house on Azalea Drive, under a trellis covered in roses that my Aunt Marlene had planted. I wore my mother's necklace, of course, the alexandrite glowing green in the afternoon sunlight. And when the photographer captured us at sunset, the stones had shifted to red, marking the transition from one chapter of my life to the next. My daughter was born 2 years later, a beautiful girl we named Vivian after my mother. She will inherit the Alexandrite collection someday when she is old enough to understand its significance. I will tell her the stories, all of them. Benedita's journey from Brazil, my great-grandmother's graduation, my grandmother's wedding, my mother's courage. And I will tell her about me, about the day I discovered my heritage had been stolen and the journey to reclaim it. The journal of Benedita sits on my bedside table now, read so many times the pages are soft with handling. Her words guide me still, a voice from 4 generations past that somehow understands the challenges of every generation to come. "We are crystals," she wrote. "We catch whatever light there is and make something beautiful from it. That is what my mother did. That is what I do. And that is what Vivian will learn to do when her time comes." My mother left me something better than jewelry. She left me a heritage of strength that no one could steal, that no fake could replicate, that would endure long after the Alexandrite itself crumbled to dust. She left me the truth. She left me herself. She left me everything that mattered. And that was worth more than any stone, no matter how rare.